you doing? So hello to you first. So today I am prick marking this. This is a strap that's going to be going onto our Brogue leather luggage tag here. So it feeds through there and holds it onto the luggage, holds it onto the case. And I'll be stitching this in after I've finished prick marking it. And then I'll be edge painting it, so giving it a bit of an edge finish. So let's bring you back to the table so you can kind of see what's going on. Hello to those joining in. Okay. So it's a thin strip. Can't make it too thick. It's only for a luggage tag. But we do have reinforcement, so it's double-sided. So it's the same goat skin on both sides. And I'm marking this 2.7 millimeters. And I'm going all the way through. There's no real reason to use an awl in this case because it's just not thick enough. And it's simpler to go all the way through. So just off that crease line. So I'm going to go back one here and then switch out. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to move my mints because they're jumping up and down as, as I'm hammering away. And now from here, switching to a 5-tooth. And then switching to a 2-tooth. And then switching back to a 10-tooth. So this could be used with a buckle. Or in this case, what I'm going to be doing, just for ease of use and simplicity, I'm going to be using a Sam Browne stud. And I'll be using a series of keepers to make sure that it can't come off. But if you wanted to use a really small buckle, which you can still get from places like Abbey, England, then of course you can switch to that. If any of you have any questions at any point about anything to do with Leathercraft, feel free to ask away. Hopefully this isn't too loud. I'm going to switch this. This thing has a little noise cancelling thing. I wonder if that will actually make any difference. Let me know if it does. Hopefully the bangs aren't too annoying for you. Maybe there's a difference, maybe not. We'll see. Now I do have a small crease line on here that I'm following. I'm going to reinforce that afterwards before I begin stitching. Guys, where in the world are you from? Always fun to know where you're watching from. I'm here in the United Kingdom. And a 2-tooth to finish off that end. Cool. I'm going to use test that out first on a little bit of scrap. Yeah, that's good. Hernan, how you doing? Thank you for joining me. So just a little bit of heat here. Just to reinforce that. A little decorative crease line. And this goat skin takes a crease line really nicely. This is glacé kid skin, so it's a young goat, but the surface has been finished to be a little shiny. As you can see, it's polished. Alrighty. Hello from Texas. Hello. Hello from the United Kingdom. There we go. Cool. Always wanted to go to Texas. That's on my one of my bucket list places to go. Do you advise anywhere in particular in Texas if you were a tourist and you'd wanted to kind of get the Texan vibe, the real Texan vibe, but without kind of the over touristy cliche areas, you know, that most people go to? I'd be interested to know. What are your thoughts on showing the branding evidently on the product or keeping it supple? Do I like overt branding or more covert branding? It depends on what you're making. Generally, if you're making really expensive, let me just adjust the noise cancelling off this thing because it does sound a bit weird. If you're making high-end leather goods, expensive leathers, exotics, bespoke pieces for discerning clients paying you a lot of money, generally, first of all, you can ask them, but generally they don't want all the branding everywhere. You tend to see, if you look at boutique brands, you tend to see a lot less of their branding on their higher end products. Dunhill is one, Hermes is another one. If you see their top tier products, the Dunhill branding isn't all over it. Overt branding tends to be on what you call access products. Access products are the cheaper end of their products that people who don't have the money for the high-end stuff can still buy so that they can kind of be part of it. But what's unknown to them is their unwitting walking advertisements for that thing. So someone once put it this way, is, you know, when you go on a website or you use an app for free and you're not paying for it, you have to pay to remove the maker stamp, right? If you're making a Wix website, you've got to pay to remove the Wix part in your URL. If you're using a photo app like InShot, you've got to pay to remove the little InShot white ghost mark or whatever it's called in the background. So think about it like that. Unless your name means something to a lot of people or you're adding clout, then I would probably keep it covert. And that's my personal opinion. It's going to be different for everyone. I don't ever think that a logo or branding should take front and center and take the eye away from the overall design, the quality of the craftsmanship, with a logo that's, you know, really loud and in your face and kind of trying too hard. But that's just personal opinion. It's a very subjective question. On this, as you can see, mine is a blind stamp, and you can kind of see it when it's reflecting in the light, and it kind of disappears when it's not. But the one thing that is standing out is the person who will be owning this, in this case me. But if I was creating this for someone, I would do something very similar to this subtle logo. If, you know, and I'd ask them, do you mind a logo on there? Would you like a logo on there? Would you like to let people know who made this? Sometimes it will be yes, sometimes it will be no. That's all part of the bespoke experience. But their initials stand out so they can easily identify. Hello from Ottawa, Canada. Kathy and accidentally Steve. Hello, everybody. William says, San Antonio is awesome for Texas history, and the hill country is great for small towns and great people. That's exactly what I'm looking for outside of great barbecue, obviously. I mean, it's like the home of barbecue. But yeah, San Antonio. Okay, cool. I definitely want the kind of the small town feel. So I'd love to visit, kind of do a bit of a tour, a bit of a road trip. But what I really dislike is going to countries, wanting to get a feel for that country, and you end up going to places which feels... Sorry, guys, just momentarily lost the stream there. Yeah, a good example is a few times. Yeah, it's absolutely awful. The falls are cool. North America is built for road trips. Yeah, I've never done an American road trip. I mean, I've been to the States a handful of times. It's been a while since I went there. I've done the Canadian road trip. I went from the Toronto area all the way over to Vancouver in BC and then back again. It took me about 3 weeks. That was epic. I don't know if you still can, but you can camp out in Walmarts, which is really cool. They allow you to do that, so you can camp there overnight, which is great because you can go in the shop the next day and get some groceries and supplies. That's probably the idea. What Leathercraft projects are you guys working on at the moment? Anybody working on anything interesting or something new for you? I've done 2 lengths of this thread, 2 arm spans. I'm hoping I can get it all done in 2. Here's to hoping anyway. So much the same as I've been using on, just going to let these needles hang for a bit. They're gaining a bit of a twist as I'm stitching. Much the same way I've used on the rest of this. I've used tonal stitching. Tonal basically just means same color. And I'm using blue thread on blue leather here. I don't really want the stitching to be too much of a feature on this, so I'm keeping it tonal. And it's very thin thread as well, 0.35, so I had to go for what's known as Gutermann Extra Strong. M782, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, M782. It looks very natural, but it is in fact a polyester. It's designed for machine and hand stitching. Not particularly expensive, but very, very strong for what it is, for a natural looking thread. It doesn't have that too much of a shine to it. It's very matte. So you would be forgiven for mistaking it for linen. But in this case, using thin thread, and you're creating something that's going to have to take the knocks by baggage handlers, you want it to be strong if it's going to be thin. And I don't think linen thread was appropriate in this case. Hernan says, I'm customizing a jeans jacket with leather pockets to insert motorcycle protections on it. Oh, that's pretty cool. Adding a little leather. Always a fancy thing. Steve says, my next project is a lined belt with a brass and enamel buckle. Okay. That reads United Arts. Haven't decided on the pattern for the belt tooling. Oh, that's interesting. An enamel. Is it like not the actual buckle, the retaining buckle, but the decorative piece on the front that's enamel? I'll take it. Steve also says, what brand of threads do you prefer? Outside of using polyester, and to be honest, I've never met a bad polyester. If it's a wax polyester or designed for hand stitching, they're all pretty much the same. Just comes down to taste and what it looks like more than anything. Oh no. I've got a knot. Generally, for most work, the brands that I use, can we escape, are going to be Filichinois. Yes, there we go. And Barber's linen. I kind of like the natural look, the traditional look. It's not, absolutely perfect thread, but I really don't mind the look of slight minor variation. Some people don't like that at all, and they want it to look very identical. I find that sometimes looks a little bit clinical, a little machine-like. I mean, I aim to have perfect stitching technique, but I don't necessarily need my leather to look perfectly uniform in the same way as I don't necessarily need my thread to look perfectly uniform. But whatever you prefer, whatever you find easier to work with, you generally do your best work with what you enjoy using. So, but yeah, essentially, the two brands, Filichinois, La Carblé, and Barber's linen thread. I have a particular penchant for vintage. I want to start a collection. This is really old stuff. This has got the red hand, the flax, Barber's linen thread. This is number 35 3-cord. I don't even know if you can get that anymore. I think that's about 30 or 40 years old. It could be a bit more. But the quality on it is higher, and the consistency is higher as well. There's still a lot of hand cultivating going on back then rather than machine cultivating. So the individual fibers known as staples tend to be longer, giving less nodes and variation. There's an interesting documentary on YouTube. If you look up British Pathe, P-A-T-H-E, British Pathe, it's a really old, like 1930s, 1940s documentary on flax linen. So British Pathe flax linen. I think there's one or two of them on there. And they're just really interesting. They go from the harvest to sorting, to putting it through the machine, and then what the machine does to convert it into thread, and showing you how they used to make it many, many years ago. There's a lot of handwork going on there as well. But the interesting thing is the machines. Each machine is so niche for one specific job. It's incredible. Hello from Bangkok. It's 11 p.m. there. Bedtime. Just finished my daily deliberate practice on edge painting, but still not getting the hang of getting a non-round flat edge for watch straps. Oh, interesting. Yeah, it's good that you're practicing. Best thing advice I can give you is experiment. Try different techniques, try different things, make things up, try different ways of applying it, different ways of drying it. And just experiment, play, be playful with it. Like anything, like stitching, like working with leather. Just have fun and try new things with it, and you learn so much in the process. But you're looking for a non-rounded, perfectly flat edge. Interesting. Well, it's going to involve a lot of sanding with something that's very flat. Maybe you could stick some sandpaper onto a sheet of glass or something, and then you can actually hold the strap, bring it back and forth on the abrasive, and just keep a super flat surface. Or you could even clamp it to a piece of wood so it's perfectly vertical. It's interesting. William says, yeah, the little towns around San Antonio and Austin have great little mum and pup stores. There's a huge German and Czech influence. That's interesting. So a lot of sausage. A lot of sausage and a lot of beer, I'm hoping. Yeah, I'm not so much of a fan of Bud Light or Coors or Miller or anything like that. That's quite common, but I do like a lot of the American craft beers. They tend to adhere to less rules than we do here in England and the rest of Europe, which makes for some really weird beers and some really awesome ones too. Canada's the same, actually. There's some fantastic craft beers in Canada. Really good. In fact, my favorite beer of all time, La Fin du Monde. I think it's by Unibrew, which is in Quebec. La Fin du Monde, meaning the end of the world. It may as well be after trying that. It's incredible. It's a Belgian-style wheat beer, 9%, but you wouldn't know it. Stealthy, very stealthy. Second that, I'm in Stratford, Ontario. Stratford, eh? I don't live too far from Stratford, England. There's so many English names in Canada, it's hilarious. Unibrew was bought by Sleeman. Sleeman, yeah, I recognize that name. It was subsequently bought by Sapporo. Oh no. Oh, Sapporo. Do you know what's really interesting, actually? I discovered a brewery, an English brewery, whilst living in Canada. And it's called Shepherd Neame. Don't know if you've ever heard of it. I used to buy their overpriced beers all the time. Then I moved to the UK and I moved to a place, moved out of London and into a place in Kent. And now I live next to that brewery. And interestingly enough, they brew Sapporo beer in that brewery for the UK and European market, under license from Japan, obviously. St. Ambrose is another good one from Quebec in Canada. Did a really good kind of, I think it was like a peach IPA or something like that. No, pale ale, not an IPA. Peach pale ale. Yeah, that was good. Stratford, Ontario is awesome. We had a honeymoon there. That's cool. I don't think I've ever been. I don't know what's there, actually. Whenever I used to vacation in Ontario, it would be usually to friends' cabins up north. French River. In fact, there's a road in the French called Turenne Road, and that's where the Turenne luxury handbag gets its name from. Fantastic memories up there. Well, I hope Stratford, Ontario is better than Stratford in London, that's for sure. All right, coming to the end of the first half on this strap. Around the corner. Now we're going to do the second half. How much has it warped? It hasn't, actually. Sometimes when you stitch one side, you'll get a bit of a bend towards that side because of the tension. I've not been adding too much, but usually you can counter it by the other side. So that's what I've been doing so far. Probably very difficult to see. It's kind of the idea of tonal stitching anyway. Put this upright first of all. Good food and world-class theatre. If ever you end up there, shoot me a line. Where is Stratford? Is it Southern Ontario? Is it Northern Ontario? I mean, I've heard of it, but I just can't envision where it is. I mean, anything past Barrie is pretty much north to me. In the summer, there's the Stratford Festival for Shakespearean and Modern Plays, great restaurants and pubs. Did I hand stitch the leather guards on my vise? They're not stitched, they're literally just glued in place and the edges turned on underneath and glued here. On the inside, I've actually got, as you can see, some pieces of thick suede, the same color as the, what's this, alligator or crocodile? Alligator. Yeah, I made this ages ago. I actually did a little video on it and put it up with the courses on how to clam finishing, basically. I replaced all the kind of cheap hardware that came with, because it's a nice clam. Replaced all the cheap hardware with brass. I can't really show you, but yeah, it's a better shot of the clam. And finished it, dyed it, stained it, and then gave it shellac finish, French polish, which is being kept nicely, so it's lasted quite a bit. Stratford is a few hours south of Toronto. Okay. I'm German descent myself, says William. You need to check out Shiner, small town here in Texas, that has a brewery in the German and Bavarian style ales. What the hell am I talking about? I'm guessing they're sticking to the German purity law by choice rather than by law. Do you like German beer? Actually, my favorite German beer is Rauch beer. I can't remember who makes that. It's basically the malted barley is smoked with beechwood. I mean, there's probably a few that do it, but probably Marzen or Marston, I think it is. It's really smoky. I mean, if you're not into that, it's going to be like drinking a bacon-infused campfire with your dark ale. It's like a porter style. But I love it. Really, really good. That with some traditional German food, maybe a little schnitzel. Yeah, that would go down a treat. Some pickles. God, I'm hungry now. So over halfway with the stitching. We definitely won't make it with one arm span on here. It's just too much length. I'm going to have to switch over on this soon. So I have another piece of thread and needles on standby, which I'll be using to switch over in a minute. If ever you do use this Gutermann thread, by the way, which is handy, it's very, very good for watch straps with small stitch spacings. If ever you do use it, though, you do need to wax it. You can stitch small sections without waxing it. It should be fine. But if you try and stitch a long section, you're really going to come into knots and tangles and all sorts of nasty things that we really don't want. So just give it a bit of a wax, and I like to run it along an electric edge creaser there. I just have the ironing tip or the spatula tip on there. Just run it over there after waxing so it soaks in. Just gives it a little bit more of like a linen-like stiffness, which helps when stitching. So in a second, I'm going to grab my extra thread. Again, guys, feel free to ask any questions. No problem at all. I can stitch and talk at the same time. Done it long enough now. All right, starting to become a bit of a pain to turn the needles over. So, yeah, I'm going to transition these. He says, walking into the wall. And we want to make it so we can't see where it transitions. And the last one, sharing the same hole with the new thread. It's kind of wrapped around the new one. There we go, that's that side. Excuse me, guys, going a bit silent here, just trying to fight this thread to unravel. There we go. Good. Perfect. Now we can move that up. I'll tuck those threads in a little bit later on. And now we can crack on. Of course, it's alive. The needles have tangled. If ever you fancy doing some Leathercraft live, you'll understand the the frustration of what can go wrong will go wrong on a live. I remember my first live was an absolute disaster. All right, much longer piece. Did that go through? There we go. How did you end up specializing in leatherwork, and where did you train? I kind of started it when I moved to Canada years ago. I found myself wanting to make a knife, and just so happened a friend of mine owned a forge, ended up making a knife from an old Nicholson file. And in the process wanted to create a sheath for it to go into. And I think he was making one, a Kydex sheath or something like that, a synthetic one. And I wanted a natural leather sheath, and I wanted it to have a maple leaf on the front. Not necessarily embossed, but actually a leaf kind of placed on the front and stitched on. And I went along to a place that sold leather, and I'd done a little bit of research, and I said, "Hi there, I'm looking to make a knife sheath. I want some vegetable tan leather because I need it to wet mold it into shape." And he took me through a selection of different leathers and thicknesses and gave me some advice on what to do. And I went away and created my leather sheath, and I had more fun making the sheath than the knife itself. I mean, the knife was okay, it was a bit rudimentary, but I really enjoyed working with leather. So I started adding leather to other things. I made an axe sheath. I made a handle for my compound bow. All sorts of different things. And then I got a commission by someone who liked my work, who saw my stuff, and he wanted to make a sheath for a chef's knife and got me to do all his kit. So it kind of started from there, really. And then I went back to the place that I purchased my leather from and ended up doing a few courses with the guy who was there, who's like more of a case maker. Very kind of like Al Stallman style. So he was very good at making cases and things like that, but it was always, what's the word, tooling. It's always tooled leather. Excuse me, got another little knot here, which I kind of played with. I've made some rifle scope covers as well, and did some tooling on those, like a deer head or antlers, that kind of thing. But I didn't enjoy it as much. And then I remember buying a book by Valerie Michael on leatherwork. And I kind of saw, oh my God, another knot, what's going on? I kind of saw the English style for the first time. And I was in Canada. And I made some of the projects from that book and studied that book. And then I really got into the vintage style. And kind of moved on from there. So I did a few classes originally and then kind of self-taught after that, just to get the hang of it. And then moving back to the UK, I wanted to kind of do more of that. So I created a workshop at the end of my garden and began creating and selling my work all around the world, which was really cool. And on the side, I also bought, refurbished and sold vintage leather goods, luggage, usually of English, British descent. So a lot of attaché cases and small trunks and briefcases, things like that. And I would have the opportunity to kind of take them apart and study them and make a lot of like a mountain of notes on everything that I would find in there. And I would also try and get hold of old books from that era to see what kind of craftsmanship that they would use, what kind of techniques, what kind of materials, so that I could essentially repair these and then sell them at a profit. So I would buy, a damaged case, a used case for like £80, and then do it up and then sell it for several hundred with some decent photography. And that was a really good side income to my business of creating and selling leather goods. And then eventually people started asking a lot of questions on how I made things, and that's when I started creating courses, and the rest, as they say, is history. Do the leather edge paints have a shelf life? Yes, they do. I have some stock that's a few years old, and I don't think I can make enough stuff to use it up for another few years. Yeah, if it's a few years old, it's going to be, I would probably throw that away. Even if you haven't opened it, it's probably separated to the point where it's no longer usable. But if you have opened it, any tiny bacteria, any kind of germs, fungus, that kind of thing, it's realistically anything up to a year. Some people say 6 months. I think it's a bit longer than that. If you live in a particularly hot environment, or you're constantly dipping in and out of your edge paint bottles all the time instead of pouring it into a separate receptacle, or you buy 1 liter or 5 liter bottles of edge paint, and it's going to take you too long to get through it, you might want to consider throwing those away and starting again. I always like to buy small bottles, typically like 100 ml, 200 ml, and just buy lots of them, and that way you're always opening a fresh one. But if you don't think you're going to be using it for a while, just have a couple bottles, and every time you throw one away and have to open a new one, order another one. And that way you only order what you need. But yeah, it does have a shelf life. If ever it's been, near freezing, it'll be junk as well. What's your opinion on using sewing machines to make stitching holes for hand stitching? Be watching Camille Fournet, Patek JLC, original something manufacturer. What's the OEM stand for? Can't remember now. They do it now. And now I'm wondering whether to invest in one. You know what? Back in the day, I had the same thinking. You have sewing machines making these holes with thread. What would happen if you remove that and you put like a bladed awl in there and then just pushed it through? You could do. However, I wouldn't do that on veg tan leather. I mean, I don't have a lot of experience with machines, sewing machines, so take this with a pinch of salt. But anytime I've seen machine stitched vegetable tan leather, there's always a mark left by the presser foot. And I know some people like to cover it, but then it's more likely to slip if it can't grip with its almost like serrated bottom. So you could, but again, it's you could end up damaging the leather with a presser foot potentially. I haven't tried it. I've often wondered, would that be a fantastic hack to make things faster? But yes, I've seen people do it. But for making a watch strap, I don't see how saving a couple minutes on a build that takes hours anyway is really going to make that much of a difference. I mean, maybe if you make a lot of watch straps and it's your business and, you know, time is money and you want to maximize your efficiency, then sure, but I don't think it doesn't take very long to prick mark or go through a watch strap, unless you're having problems with pricking irons going through watch straps at varying thicknesses. Then, you know, that might be something to look into. Shiner Bock is certainly very tasty. Yeah, any kind of Bock beers. What is a Bock beer now? It always has the like a goat on it or something like that. It's not that one. No, that's a lambic. That's the natural yeast one. And Bock beers, I know they're usually a bit darker, like a brown. Hello from Portugal. Great to see. The hand is good and feeling come back yet. Yeah. No, I can't feel the top of my finger, unfortunately. It did take a while to get the stitching technique back, but no, I can't. Trigger finger's done, man. I don't know if I'm going to have surgery on it again to redo the nerve, but I'm not seeing any improvement, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, it works. I can still hold the beer and stitch. I mean, what else do you need in life? I just have to be careful that I don't accidentally burn myself or cut myself because I just can't feel it. Decades old food colors. I truly should dump those. Well, I certainly wouldn't consume them. They might be okay. I did hear that spices don't really have a shelf life when they're dry. They just lose their flavor over time. But they're perfectly fine, you know, to have, I don't know, pepper that's, you know, 6 years old in the cupboard, as long as it's been kept in a relatively dark, dry place. But yeah, food coloring, I don't know. Maybe donate it to science. See how it goes. All right, we're right at the end. It's the last part. I'd never show this little dainty stitch on camera because it's just can't see it. What have I done here? There we go. But it actually looks really good. It's got a lovely angle to it. Angles are difficult on thin leather, but one tip I will give you is use a smaller pricking iron. A lot is to do with the ratio of the distance between your stitch holes and the thickness, which will equal whether or not you have nice angled stitches. So just something to bear in mind. If ever you're stitching thin leather and you're wondering why on earth you can't get the stitches at a nice little angle on both sides or even one side, you might be using a pricking iron that's slightly too big. Barrel-aged stouts are my current favorite. Oh, what's that one from Scotland now? Innis and Gunn. Innis and Gunn. Innis and Gunn. Very good. Slightly too sweet for my tastes, but they do a whole range of barrel-aged beers. Very complex, very enjoyable. Their original is probably one of the better ones. It has a very resinous kind of pininess is the best way I can describe it from the hops, but the bitterness is really kind of counteracted by how sweet it is. But yeah, it's a whiskey barrel aged, but they also do a rum finish, a few different ones, a little bit more on the expensive side, usually a little stronger as well. I mean, we're talking like 6 to 8%, something like that. All right, let's tap this down and then we can get to some edge finishing. I'm just going to move this. I hold it, by the way, if you're interested. I don't know, maybe not. I use a little hobby vise, which has a little kind of ball and socket joint, so it clamps and I can move it around. And a piece of leather in there, obviously, for protection. But yeah, a little hobby vise with a ball and socket joint comes in so handy for a lot of things. There's a little bit of a twist to that. So we're going to pull and twist in the opposite direction. There we go. Okay, so polished hammer. Ideally not one covered in wax like this one. Sympathies on the nerve damage. The nerves tend to grow back over time. Cut my thumb 2 years ago, still none but improving. Oh, that's interesting. They told me up to 6 months to a year, and it's kind of, yeah, okay, it hasn't been that long yet, but I would have thought it would be coming through by now. Just for those who don't know, I didn't do this. I severed the artery in the nerve with a kitchen knife, doing something silly. It wasn't Leathercraft. William says, I've noticed them gaining popularity, but have not had any myself. Yeah, give them a go. Give them a go. They're not overly like super IPAs, which I used to love. I don't like anymore. I don't need something insanely bitter that tastes like grapefruit and passion fruit. It's not my thing, man. Are you using water-based glue? It depends what on. If I'm gluing leather to something non-porous, for example, on the inside of our luggage tag here, if I open that, you might be able to see the shine. That's a sheet of acetate, which is a semi-synthetic material. It's kind of a plastic, halfway between a natural material and plastic. That's non-porous, so I can't use a water-based glue. They just don't stick very well. I did test many different glues to see which worked best, and predictably, solvent-based contact adhesive worked incredibly well. If I'm gluing porous to porous, for example, the flesh side of leather to the flesh side of leather, then I will. On this, I didn't, because it has a layer of nylon reinforcement going through it, and water-based contact adhesive isn't the best to glue to synthetics. Even though it is technically porous, it just doesn't adhere very well. Same with PVA or white glue, Elmer's glue, etc. So again, I would use solvent-based contact adhesive. Where I can, I don't, because it's probably healthier for you. I say probably, it definitely is. First thing I need to do here is find where we transition from one seam to the next. And we have just a tiny little thread end sticking out. So I'm going to tuck that in. A little bit more white glue. Where are we? There we are. Difficult to see, but that's the point. Manipulate any threads that don't look like they're in alignment there. Perfect. Okay, so now I need to do the same on the other end. Second finish. Important to do. Helps prevent unraveling, but it looks much nicer when it's nicely finished. All right. Let me put a noise cancelling and see if it actually makes a difference for you guys. You can tell me if it helps or not. Okay, good stuff. Right. That looks pretty good, actually. I'm happy with that. Okay, so we're going to edge finish this now. New Holland Brewing's Dragon's Milk Stout. I do like a milk stout. I think you've talked about this before, but what do you usually prefer? Fully glued lining, or just glued on the edges? It kind of, to be honest with you, it really depends on what you're making. If you're making, say, an English briefcase, then obviously it's better to have a glued-in lining rather than a soft lining, because you've got a rigid exterior as well, and it adds to that rigidity that you want in a very structured case. Same with an attaché case, you want to glue in because it's against something that's hard. When you're creating a handbag of various different kinds, then it's often better to have the lining only glued in where it's going to be stitched around the edges. That leaves it able to move around, and this helps give a softer feel when you put your hand in the bag. And also, if you want to create pockets, especially pockets that you would open with a zip or that are open at the top and you put your hand inside and they go into the lining, you can't have it glued. So it gives you the option of adding those pockets, whereas in something where it's completely glued in, if you stitched a pocket to a glue in, as you use the pocket and put your hand in, you can actually start pulling the lining away from the exterior where it's glued in place. So instead of having pockets, what you'll see in briefcases is you'll have dividers for different things, or you'll have a pocket that's placed inside and then stitched along the top to kind of circumnavigate that issue. Or you'll have different pockets for different things, one for your pens, one for your business cards, one for your mobile phone. So it depends what you're making, and depends what you're going to be doing for storage solutions inside the bag or case that you're making. It's right in front of me. So yeah, I had a milk stout a few months back. I don't remember what brand. Yeah, they're quite nice. They have a different mouthfeel. Kind of a bit, it sounds gross, but a bit like milk. Sometimes you drink it and you have a bit of a scummy mouth afterwards. That's probably the lactose. Maybe I'm slightly lactose intolerant. I don't know. Hammer away, Captain. Noise cancellation makes you sound a bit muffled. Okay, yeah. I did think that. Listening back. Tell you what, though, when the sawmill is going next door, or the heater is going in here in winter, it's like it doesn't exist when you put the noise cancelling on, but it does make you sound muffled, as you say. Cool. Right. Let's get back to business. Put this lid on. Now, ordinarily, I wouldn't necessarily edge bevel something this thin before edge painting, but if you notice the slot that it goes into in the luggage tag, it's a bit like a, I can't remember the word, it's not an oval, but if I put my pale skin behind there you go, you can see it's curved in the edges, it's not a square. So the edge paint will help with this as well, but we want to round it very slightly. It doesn't take a lot. But it also helps things slide through. This is a chrome tan, but it's a very firm chrome tan. It's enough that you can actually finish the edges. I've done that one already. And on the underside, yeah, edge beveling is, you can do it before edge painting. It generally makes it a little bit harder because there's not so much of a straight cut off as a 90-degree angle. You're actually sort of curving and gently easing into the flat areas of the rear or the front. So I don't necessarily advise edge beveling before edge painting. as it can make it more tricky, and successive layers of edge paint begin to add a rounding effect. Okay. Where is, they need cleaning. Okay, I'm about to break my own rule. Remember I said you should pour your edge paint into a receptacle. Mind you, this is only a little 50 mil, so it's fine. Ideally, don't kind of dip, put it on, dip and put it on, because you're adding bacteria all the time. If you have to do this, generally speaking, you want to use a little bit of alcohol. Meths in this case, and just clean and sterilize what you're dipping into it. Just reduces the amount of bacteria that you add to it. I mean, there's bacteria in the air and everything, but we do what we can, right? Okay, where do we want to start from? Okay, so I'm going to start from in front of me so I can go backwards away from it. See how I go with the awl. I might actually just switch to a roller because I have one handy. But that would take 3 seconds. Where's the fun in that? And this is only thin, so I can't really add too much at once. Quite absorbent, this leather, so we don't require any kind of, what's the word I'm looking for, primer. Placing it on, pulling it on, and then pulling it down the edges, because remember we rounded those with, and then pushing on into the edge, because we rounded that with the edge beveler, didn't we? Right. Again, guys, feel free to chat away or ask away. There's one way to add a little bit more paint if you can't put too much of a blob down. If you're working with very thin edges, is just tap it a few times along there and then just pull it along. There's no real trick or skill to add in the first layer of edge paint. The skill for edge painting is number one, having a straight edge to work with in the first place. And number two, it's all in the sanding. If you want a really nice finish on your edge paint, you want to make sure that every time you finish sanding, you have a perfectly sanded flat edge. Even if that means there's still little bits of leather exposed here and there, that's fine. But it's when you go to kind of 90%, that's good enough. There's a few low spots here and there that I can see, but the next layer of edge paint will sort that out. Well, by the next layer of edge paint will sort it a little bit. You'll do it to 92% perfect, and then you sand back to 90 again, and you're constantly basically chasing the work that you should have done previously in the sanding. So what I'm trying to say is, between each layer, when you sand your work, your edge, don't stop until you have a perfect edge on every single layer that you do. You think that's going to take a lot more effort and a lot more time, but it saves you time and in turn gives you a nicer finish. Skill is all in the sanding. So I'm going to put the first layer on this side, let it dry, and then I'm going to do the opposite side. It's going to be a bit messy on a strap this thin to do both sides at once. Probably end up getting it all over my hands. Do you do anything to the edge after you apply the edge paint? Well, other than sanding? No, I mean sanding is what you would need to do to level the edge and at the same time prepare it for the next layer. You want to key that surface. You want to make sure you've abraded the surface. Otherwise, if you add edge paint to smooth edge paint, it doesn't adhere to itself very well. It won't be bad, but that's when you get peeling. Especially on areas on a watch strap, especially when where it tends to bend the most. If you haven't sanded between the layers, it can start peeling away, almost like an onion. But no, there's nothing to do to it. I don't use heat. I don't use any kind of wax, especially not wax. Okay. There we go. There's our glistening edge painted edge. I'm just going to leave that on its side. And because I've glued the whole thing on a curve, it wants to stay in a bit of a curve. It keeps it upright. Otherwise, I'd have to use some kind of clamping system. So re-cleaning the end of that. I've been trying Fibing's edge coats while it usually dries crooked, while wet, it's perfectly smooth. Then it dries and some wrinkles, inconsistencies show up. The problem with Fibing's edge coat is there's nothing wrong with it. It's the marketing and what it's known for. Excuse me. Bit of hay fever going on. It's not an edge paint. It's not an edge paint, and it never was, and it doesn't try to be. Fibing's edge coat is really just a one-stop finish for the edges of vegetable tanned leather. If you're making a case, if you're making some kind of straps or belts, especially dipping a little bit of sponge in it and wiping it along, so it's like kind of soaks in, and it's a stain and a sealant all in one. That's really what it is. I think, and this is my impression, years ago, what used to be popular in Leathercraft, especially here in the UK, but I'm sure it would be in the States as well, is they would take certain types of animal glue, and then they would take powdered aniline dyes and mix it in with the animal glue, usually things like rabbit skin glue, and it would be almost like an old-fashioned edge paint or an edge finish. And then you would, while it was still warm, wipe it along with a piece of cloth, with a piece of sponge or another piece of leather, and it would dye and seal and finish the edge all in one. And then you can use a little bit of canvas to wipe over it and polish it. But I think kind of Fibing's edge coat was a synthetic version of that, easier to make. You didn't have to prepare it up ahead of time, and it was just meant to be applied all in one go. But many people, myself when I first started out, start trying to use it by standing between layers and then putting another one and then standing between layers, and it's never really been designed for that, in my opinion. And it's never going to give those kind of results. What you're looking for is something a lot more rubberized. I mean, the one that I use is Uniters Pro, but there's others: Giardini, Stahl, Fenice, Venice, you name it. There's so many different brands now that do edge paints, but they're designed to be kind of sanded between layers, or especially if you're in a factory setting, a buffing wheel. So we sand it as artisans, but in factory settings you use a buffing wheel, and then you put the next layer of edge paint, then you can use a buffing wheel again, depending on what kind of finish that you're looking for. But Fibing's edge coat isn't really a very good edge paint. With a bit of work, you can make it work, but it's a bit more, I find, a bit more plasticky and a bit more brittle than many of the more rubberized and flexible options out there that are designed to be edge paints. And if you build up too many layers of Fibing's edge coat, it can begin to crack in areas that flex a lot. So My advice would be experiment with other options as an edge finish, and just use Vibing's edge coat as a one-stop finish. And then you'll find it much easier. Okay, guys, I'm going to leave it at that for now. I'm going to go and have something to eat while this dries. Bane of my life. I'm always waiting for edge paint to dry or some kind of adhesive to dry. Be good if we could do away with that and just like stick it under a UV lamp for 10 seconds and it's done. But anyway, yeah, thank you for joining me. Thanks for all the questions. It's been great having a chat with you guys. If ever you do get any questions, don't forget you can comment below, or you can email me, Philip, 1L in Philip, at leathercraftmasterclass.com. Don't forget, those who are brand new to hand stitching and leathercraft in general, if you want a breakdown of the technique that I've been using today, you can go to leathercraftmasterclass.com, which I'll obviously link below, and you can get yourself a free video course on how to hand stitch, so the basics of hand stitching to get you started. And also good for those who've kind of maybe built up some bad habits. Soga says, thank you for the information. William says, cool watching you paint. Where did you work? Where I work with wedge tan, I sand the edge, then burnish, then dye. Yeah, I mean, there's so many different variations of that, but whatever works for you. I've done it that way. I've done it different ways. It kind of ends up the same. Another great live. Thanks, Phil. Hey, you're welcome, Robert. And Steve says, thanks so much. Good live. Have a good rest of the day to everyone. Thank you very much. And I will see you guys in the next live. Stay tuned. Take care.